Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Stephanie Sarah. I'm the head of marketing for Tough Leaf, and we have a really what we think is an interesting conversation for you guys today. We're going to be talking about the new administration and the new rules and what that means for construction compliance. So a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording the session, so we will be sending this out Monday to everyone that registered for the event. So don't worry if you miss something, you'll be able to come back and watch this later. Questions, we are going to have a Q&A section at the end of this. You can either put them in the chat bot as the conversation is going on, or wait until the end. At the end, we will go over all the questions asked. And if you'd also like to turn your camera on and ask a question live, you're also able to do that by raising the icon for your hand, and I will call on you. If you have any technical issues, like being named Scott Levine, please just go ahead and exit the meeting, come back in, or update your name, and you should be able to hear everybody and see the 5 of us currently on camera. And then the last thing that we'd like to just note is that this is a fact-based conversation. We're going to keep this as politically unbiased as possible, since that is not the conversation we're having today. We just are going to talk about what is going on with the administration and what that means for construction. All right, so I'm going to introduce our speakers, and I'm going to have them say hello to you, and then I'm going to hand off to Wissam so he can get started. Our first speaker is Shamari Wade. He is an attorney at Greenberg. I'm going to say this wrong. Traurig?
Traurig, correct.
There we go. You can go ahead and say hi,
Hi,
Shamari.
thanks, Stephanie. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Shamari Wade. I'm a shareholder in the Government Contracts Group of Greenberg Traurig. Based here in DC, I work with all government contractors, small to large. I came from the 8A world. My father was an 8A contractor, and I'm really excited to be here and share our insight. And like Stephanie said, there's no shortage of topics and changes here. So look forward to a really great discussion.
Great. Our next speaker is Thomas Quinn, who is the managing partner for federal at LSN Partners. Oh, Tom, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. My name is Tom Quinn, and as Stephanie said, I'm the managing partner of LSN Partners federal practice here in DC. I've been in DC now for about 25 years. I think we're on my 6th presidential administration, and many changes in power and the balance of power on Capitol Hill. LSN Partners works with a worldwide client base focused on issues ranging from complex infrastructure projects to federal policy to local government concerns and research and development programs. We involved our clients in a lot of the high-profile programs supported by the Biden administration, and we're doing the same right now to integrate our clients into the new Trump administration, which, as everyone on the call knows, has very different policies and goals. There probably hasn't been a Q1 for an administration like we've seen this year. The rapid changes will take some time to settle down, but I am optimistic that between the market's reaction and the response here in DC, it'll speed up the process within the White House, and we'll have a better sense of how this whole transition is going to shake out pretty soon. Look forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Tom. And then I'm also going to introduce Jose Fuentes, who is a partner also in federal at LSN Partners.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jose Fuentes. Like Stephanie mentioned, I'm a partner with LSN Partners in the DC office. I have close to over 30 years of experience working on the federal government. I worked at all different levels within federal government, and looking forward today this discussion, hearing from your questions, and moving this forward and see what we can do.
Great. And then last but not least, we're going to introduce Wissam Akra, who is the CEO and co-founder of Tough Leaf. Wissam?
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wissam. I'm the CEO and founder of Tough Leaf. My background is in managing mega infrastructure and development jobs around the country. Noticed the challenge faced by contractors and government agencies in finding and hiring the right small, local, diverse businesses onto their projects. And that's why in 2020, we started Tough Leaf to help facilitate that process. I'm not the expert when it comes to what the rules are or from a legal perspective, but I can tell you what we're seeing in the market on active projects that we're working on right now, active RFPs, and the changes that we're seeing in our government with our government clients as well. But I want to thank Greenberg Traurig and LSN for joining us today because they are the experts on all of this, and looking forward to a fruitful conversation.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Wissam. We're going to start with federal, and enjoy the conversation, guys.
Thank you. I want to start by, addressing, we're going to talk about things from the federal perspective. Throughout the presentation, we're going to talk about things from the federal perspective, state, and then city and local, and then private. And that's to talk about, who's funding the project and what effects does that have on the compliance of these projects. So we'll start with federal. I'm going to turn it over to Tom to take us through, their thoughts, and obviously Shamari and Jose are going to be joining as well.
Thank you, Wissam. And Jose and Shamari, feel free to jump in when you do have something to add here. I know we've all been working in this space for a while now. And I'll start off by saying the current climate in DC is chaotic. And I think if you watch the news, you can see that. You can see that reflected each evening. We saw this during the first Trump administration, and I expect that they're going to continue to flood the zone in order to create some uncertainty and direct attention to or away from certain activities. Today, we see congressional Republicans, for the most part, quiet but supportive of the president's efforts. Democrats on Capitol Hill are very much struggling with how to respond to some of these rapid changes. The expanded use of executive orders to make policy announcements has certainly complicated compliance with contracting. Executive orders related to DEI in particular are facing multiple lawsuits, further confusing what the current rules actually are and what they will be in the coming months. These developments reflect a substantial shift in federal policy concerning DEI initiatives and procurement practice, influencing both public institutions, meaning the federal government, and the private sector entities, yourselves, who are engaged in federal contracting. All small business programs face some potential for restructuring within the administration. These changes are unlikely to come from Congress, at least initially, although I do expect as the 2026 budget process moves forward, we'll start seeing Congress putting some of this language into their appropriations bills. Well, whether they're able to get it through to law is another question. One more second. The federal contracting goals I wanted to mention in the Trump administration are increasingly emphasizing geographic and industry-specific disparities rather than being explicitly race-based. While these changes have made it more complex for minority-owned businesses to qualify for certain contracting preferences, the government has signaled an intent to continue supporting economic opportunities for disadvantaged businesses just in their own way. And I anticipate we're going to get a better idea what that's going to look like moving forward. We're going to move on to the next slide in just a moment. And as we start talking about executive orders, I want to mention that anything one president can do, the next president can undo. Things created by Congress, the Department of Education, for instance, needs an act of Congress to change. So while a president can change contracting rules, can make DEI a forbidden topic, the next president can come in and reverse all of these changes again. I know many of you saw during the Biden administration, they added a number of provisions to contracting and grants related to broader impacts. How are you helping disadvantaged communities? I know a lot of organizations put a lot of work into to beefing up their part of their organization who can answer those questions and work with community groups. Those requirements are going away, and we're not going to see them until maybe another Democratic administration. Next slide, please. Now, one of the administration's first order of business on day one and day two were to release the executive orders that you see on your screen here. The first EO, titled "Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunities," introduces significant changes affecting federal contractors of all sizes. This order revokes previous directives, including EO 11246, which has been in effect since about 1965. And it mandated affirmative action and prohibited discrimination by federal contractors based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. Everyone on this call, I suspect, has come up in the private sector with these rules in place. This is a major change that really was not anticipated before taking office. The other executive order, 14151, This is ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. This is a more internal-facing order, removing all of the DEI programs within the federal government. What we're seeing here with actions like these is federal contractors are now required to eliminate their own DEI programs from their operation, and including discontinuing any affirmative action measures previously implemented to promote workplace diversity. Organizations like folks on the call following the previous law will now have to adjust to what the new rules are in place. Contracts with the federal government now also are going to include clauses mandating adherence to federal anti-discrimination laws without the use of DEI initiatives. Contractors must certify that their employment practices do not involve DEI programs that conflict with federal laws. Non-compliance could result in the termination of those contracts. Spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill since these executive orders were released, and I can tell you a couple of things I can share with you. For the most part, Capitol Hill's finding out about these things when we are. I've been up on the Hill a number of times where you see the breaking news cry up on the TV in the corner for a new executive order. Congress is not, the Republicans in Congress are not consulted before these are announced, and they have very little information on how to provide guidance on this. I suspect in the next couple of months, we're going to see a lot of discussion on this in the congressional hearings for the president's budget oversight. Each agency will have to come up to Capitol Hill to justify their budget. And I suspect that in every hearing, Democrats are going to be asking about these executive orders and others, how it's impacting the industry, how it's possibly icing out certain companies who've been doing business with the federal government for a very long time. Jose and Shamari, anything you want to jump in on here, or we can move to the next slide.
One comment as the lawyer, Tom, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, please.
Sure. So I agree with everything Tom said. It's certainly uncertain times here in DC. And these executive orders that Tom summarized certainly do up in decades worth of practice. I would note that recently a federal court in Maryland did enjoin the Trump administration from these EOs for the reasons that Tom then outlined. There's so much uncertainty. It's vague. It's difficult to navigate. So for the moment, there's a nationwide injunction, but for the reasons we were talking about, every day is a little different. So this remains to be seen, sort of what the future is. The other thing I'm seeing on my end is the False Claims Act potential liability here, where federal contractors could be subject to the whistleblower suits, trouble damages, et cetera, to the extent that these are actually implemented. So certainly something that we'll be keeping track of. Over to Jose.
Thanks, Shamari. And I'll just add a couple quick points on what Shamari and Tom expanded on, and a couple of things to just keep in mind as we go through this turbulent period with these executive orders and the judicial side of things, taking a look at the actions being taken. One of the easiest things that you can do right now is just stay informed. Follow the updates from agencies like SBA, DOD, HUD on the latest actions on what is going on, not also in the White House, but what they're doing in terms of their processes as well, in compliance or with these legal challenges as things that can be changed. Engaging in your industry association. I'm sure a lot of you are part of small business associations and in the contracting space and just in general that are ongoing right now. Stay informed through those processes as well. These are tools that will be very helpful to you throughout this process and understanding what is going on, because anything can change in any second and any portion of the day. And communicating with your prime contractors and these agencies, that's probably one of the best things that you can do, so that everyone's on the same page and has a really good understanding of where things are heading to.
And I would just add, to show you how quickly things are moving, and I have not read the story yet, but as we were getting on this call, I saw a judge had ruled that the firing of thousands of federal employees was illegal. And now they're going to have to address that. So this is happening very quickly, but I am confident that we are going to get to a point where this all settles down in the very near future. And we may not all like some of the new rules, but we're going to know what the playing field looks like, and that's going to be half the battle right now.
Yeah, I guess what we'll add from our end is, we've always been working on federal projects, and helping our clients, our contractors and developers find companies to meet the percentage requirement of small owned businesses. And the change that we're seeing on our end is in the past, the 22% that had to go to small businesses was divided into subcategories, which is small disadvantaged businesses, women-owned small businesses, veteran-owned small businesses, and so on. What we're seeing in more recent RFPs right now is we are really just seeing one number for small business participation. So they're not really going through and splitting it up to different groups or categories or gender, race specific small businesses. They're just saying you have to go to 22% to companies identified as small businesses on the SBA website. So that's like the major change that we're seeing on our end.
Speaking of the SBA, I think that's our next slide. And Shamari, I'll turn this one over to you.
No,
your expertise.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, Wassam, that's a perfect segue, actually. Can't beat that. So I will start off, like, we all know, certainly all these programs are subject of some scrutiny and judicial challenge. But to Tom's point earlier, even though a president and the administration can issue executive orders to change certain things, other programs are creatures of Congress and statute. And that's something they always come back to, as I'm sure we all are kind of crisscrossing the country speaking to groups. The 8A program is a creature of Congress. And the program, and again, I always say this, is actually, for what it's worth, a national security program, because we want a diverse, robust industrial defense industrial base. And we don't want to necessarily have just a small number of large contractors doing everything in the federal procurement space. So, the program is certainly under some scrutiny now, but for the time being, it's difficult to change anything on the Hill. And so to that end, what I'm telling my clients is, certainly have a broad business development pipeline, not just federal, but state, local, commercial, certainly. But the 8A program itself is not going anywhere. Now, one thing that has changed even in the last administration is the presumption of social disadvantage. So there is a federal case. The plaintiff was Ultima, and essentially the federal court in Tennessee ruled that the presumption of social disadvantage violated the 14th Amendment and some other equal protection clauses. So as a result of that, the SBA didn't appeal it, but what it did do is implement the social disadvantage narrative, and that was a really big change in 2024 that required current participants of the 8A program, as well as applicants, to create a social disadvantage narrative. You had to describe instances of discrimination from your education, history, business background, et cetera. And it had to be approved by the SBA. So we're kind of in the flow of that part. But I think something that could change in the SBA moving forward is that presumption. Now, there have always been non-disadvantaged, quote unquote, applicants in the 8A. I have some very successful clients who do not have are not minorities, but they've been through the 8A program. So that's always been there, but we see more of that focus. The other thing that's changed under the newly appointed SBA administrator is the SDB goals. And that's something what Wassam mentioned, where they're going back down to the statutory floor, which is 5%. Now, to be fair, it's always been there. So these are always goals. And historically, the SDB program has exceeded those goals. But we could see is more emphasis on other programs like HubZone that never reached those thresholds, like the 3% goal. So we'll see. I have also heard sort of some scuttlebutt, if you will, about the future of the SDB program. We'll see where that is. I'm out of the prediction business at this point in my career. But I think into Jose's point, the important thing is to keep your ear to the ground, have good relationships, have a diverse, broad business plan and pipeline. And DCs are always going to go up and down. When I first began my career in 2010, clients were saying, wow, the big three automakers are way too tumultuous, putting to government contracts where things are more stable. And now, fast forward a couple of decades later, now it's a little different, but, just sort of have a long view. And I agree, there's a lot of sort of shock and awe at the moment, but we're going to get into some kind of normalcy at some point over the next few months, I'd anticipate. And we'll all sort of, figure out where that is. Jose, I know you had some thoughts on the changes to the mentor-protege and joint venture framework, so I'll have you take it away there.
Yeah, and I'll expand a little bit more. I grew up in a family that my father was a small business owner too. He was of Cuban, migrated from Cuba and ran a small business and was in the roofing business. And and in the beginning, he had a couple of contracts with local state government officials, which is, as all of you know, that is great. That is something you can hang on your hat on and build upon and expand your business. But one of the things that he would work on is that diversification, because you never know when those contracts don't longer exist or they're cut or eliminated or what have you. And he would always say, diversifying your client base beyond those contracts is something that's important that you need to take a look at. And it's not just looking on the federal side of things, as you know, and I'm sure all of you are doing this. It's the state and the local, and including the private sector when looking for these different opportunities. And while in parallel, you're also looking at considering strategic partnerships. And what I mean by that is build alliances with larger firms through non-DEI based partnerships, focusing on competitive strengths such as expertise, location, unique capabilities. I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm sure this is all what you're doing, but it's good to point out and know as we go through this process that there are other ways that hopefully additional opportunities exist elsewhere. One of the biggest things that what's at stake and what we're taking a look at, and Tom alluded to this earlier, is legislatively what we're looking at. You're seeing all these executive actions going through. You're seeing what the SBA is now doing and unveiling to keep in line with these executive orders. But legislatively, what can Congress do to all this? As Tom mentioned, every president has the luxury of removing and adding executive orders that they don't like from previous administrations. But from a congressional standpoint, Congress does have the ability to codify things like this. For example, the DEI EOs right now that we're discussing, Congress could take a look at this and codify it through language and pass through Congress, which would make it a little bit more difficult for the next administration to reverse. And it would take multiple different aspects, but it would also take another round of Congress to reverse these actions. So these are things that we're tracking, these things that we're monitoring, and I would keep stressing the fact that just stay tuned, keep taking a look at what's going on, keep your ear to the ground on and tracking and monitoring what's going on at the federal level, but especially on the judicial side of things, because as everyone's been mentioning throughout this Zoom, is things can change at any single moment.
All right, and with that, discussion on the federal, I guess to move from the federal side of things and the federal requirements on federal funded projects to more state and local responses to these executive orders. What we're seeing, if you want to go to the next slide, Stephanie, is most of the places that we work in, hasn't been really any changes to date. It's been kind of the same practice, the same requirements we've seen in the past. We'll talk more details later on, but a few folks can highlight what it takes to change things on the state side or on the local side and how that process works. so that the people on the webinar can understand if this is like going to be automatically happening or if it needs changes on the state legislator or the state governance and things of that nature. So I guess I can also talk about these slides. According to what we're seeing right now is in certain places, we have some examples here. The state is shifting, they're changing their requirements to go more to race and gender neutral versus race and gender specific certifications. But on the local side, we're also seeing things stay the same. So in South Florida, there's been some changes on the state level, but on Miami-Dade, for example, Broward County, they still have their compliance requirements that include gender and race specific programs. Same thing in Palm Beach County. If you take a look there, they have some requirements that are state race and gender neutral, like small business, and they have others that are state race and gender specific, like minority-owned business, women-owned business, and minority women-owned business. So even if things are changing on the federal side, that doesn't mean that they necessarily change on the state. Even if they change on the state, that doesn't necessarily mean that they change on the local side. And as we understand it, for requirements to change, for percentages to change, for certifications to change, that has to go through state, local legislator, and their own form of governance. A couple other examples, in Dallas, the city has higher requirements than the state minimums. In Atlanta, also there's local compliance programs that remain very strong and high thresholds, while Georgia is pulling back a little bit. And then we're seeing on the local side as well, certain cities, reacting differently. So even as certain states are changing the requirements, city ordinances exist. There are project-specific requirements where if it's a large project and has the potential to impact local and small businesses, the higher percentages to local and small business participation, also with public-private partnership, is we're seeing the same thing. And then we're seeing more local certification programs than before. And that's because every local entity or city wants to represent their constituents differently. So I'll give you another example. In Florida, there's the Florida certification on the state level, and then there's Palm Beach County certification, that's the county level, and then there's West Palm Beach has its own certification program. So we're seeing a lot of these new things where there are more certifications and different percentages percentages required depending on where you are, and also different compliance requirements, where some areas are requiring you to track the entire outreach effort or the solicitations, and others just want you to submit your final numbers. And we've seen in certain cities where they're getting rid of good faith effort waivers, like in New York City, we're seeing that happen more and more often, where you're not allowed to ask for a waiver from your participation percentage. So kind of to wrap all of this up, we're seeing a lot of different requirements added. Some are scaled down, some percentages are going higher, some are going lower, and some are just shifting from race and gender neutral to from race and gender specific to race and gender neutral. And in other places, we're seeing new certifications be added that are race and gender neutral, so that no matter what your race or gender is, you're still able to get certified based on certain requirements, which is either your location, those are local business enterprises, or your revenue or size, and those for small businesses. And other places, we're seeing more of the SETI requirement, which is a socially economically disadvantaged enterprise that depends on a lot of different factors, including education level and immigrant status and things of that nature. So there's more uncertainty and more certifications than ever, I would say. We're obviously as Stuffleaf staying on top of all of these changes and helping our clients remain compliant and meet their participation requirement. Anything to add before we move out of state and local from our speakers?
Yeah, I think I would just like to add, I think you're going to start seeing some trends as we go forward. Probably more the red states adopting a lot of what you see the Trump administration implementing here in DC, and the blue states trying to do their best to maintain what the previous process was. I think this will probably be on a case-to-case basis. No two states will probably follow the same model. But what we have seen in the past is when we do have a president who's popular with their party, the states do try to follow suit.
Yeah, I agree. Everything that Wissam and Tom mentioned. Putting my lawyer hat on, there is a interesting case that's out of Tennessee, the Mid-America Milling Company versus DOT. That got some news in the construction industry because it essentially challenged a lot of the DOT MBE programs. The implications are still a little unknown now. It was limited for a while until the states to the states where the plaintiffs who challenged the MBE programs were bidding. And right now, I think there's a 90-day hold on that while the parties are negotiating. But that was the defendant in that case was Secretary Buttigieg, and now with the change in administration, it will be interesting to see sort of how that plays out. I'm not sure anyone else has any thoughts on that, but we're tracking that, and that could be some an implication on the state side, but flowing down from the federal.
Right. Perfect. Now let's talk private sector, right? We discussed federal, state, and local. Now we're going to jump into the private sector and the response to the compliance changes. We've seen both types of responses. We've seen companies that are maintaining their programs and doubling down on their programs. And we've seen companies that are scaling back or removing programs. You can see the names over here. And some of these clients we work for on certain projects, and I'll just highlight what Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase's opinion was. We don't do supplier diversity because it's the right thing. We do it because it's the best thing for business. And that's how they've seen their profitability go up, by instilling these supplier diversity programs. And there's a lot in the news about what's going on in Costco and the shareholders. Same thing with Apple, where they're maintaining very strong programs for diversity, and we're seeing others that are eliminating the DEI initiatives that they've had and moving more to economic opportunity initiatives or belonging, and changing verbiage and what their requirements are. So we're seeing different reactions from different sectors in the market. And obviously, it's been all over the news. There's boycotts for Target and others, and we'll see how that where that settles at the end. Based on my understanding, and I'd love to hear the speakers' opinions on this, but we're kind of in a gray zone here where each company is doing their own thing, depending on their, interpretation of the executive order and what they can and cannot do, and the political backlash versus, user backlash or and things of that nature. So I'll turn it over to you folks.
I think it is a gray area, and it's a bit unpredictable how things are going to be moving forward. I think you're going to see a number of federal contractors, out of fear of retaliation, are going to follow along, and they're going to do what's in the interest of their contracts. They're going to do what this administration wants. Maybe they'll flip back in 3 years if there's another party in charge. But I think you're going to see a lot of the private sector going forward start falling in line with Trump. There's a lot of phone calls being made behind the scenes. There's a lot of pressure that you don't see in the media on a lot of companies to publicly announce that they're not involved with DEI anymore. And it's a very difficult decision going on inside a lot of companies right now. I'd also mention that there was an organized protest going on against a number of companies who have already acknowledged that they're pulling back on their DEI. So it is a double-edged sword. As Wissam was saying, you're going to piss off the public, or you're going to piss off the administration. And you got to figure out where that balance is right now. And we're clearly not there yet.
From my vantage point, certainly in the federal contract space, Tom's exactly right. There's given the contractual obligations and privy to contract with the government, no surprise that the federal contract community is sort of pulling back on some of that because they're risking sort of the False Claims Act violation potentially and compliance with their federal contract. So yeah, it remains to be seen what will happen, but yeah, this is no surprise. Now, on the flip side, so certainly any companies that do not have federal contracts and have that kind of discretion are doubling down, and so it's been interesting to see that kind of dichotomy and. Certainly, I think Costco, to Sam's point, the Costco made a business case for it. It wasn't so much this is the right thing to do. It's hey, this helps retention and recruitment, and it's good for our bottom line. And the shareholders, will say, yeah, that makes sense. Let's keep that. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and on the government side, whether it's federal, state, or local, we're seeing, even when set-asides are canceled from race and gender specific, they're moving to race and gender neutral, right? So they're, let's say, canceling minority-owned, or maybe the better example is
I'm on a webinar.
Small disadvantaged businesses and moving it to small businesses, or if you look at Palm Beach County is adding small business requirements so everyone can get certified. On the private side, when people are canceling their DEI policies, we're seeing companies just canceling them outright, saying, okay, we're not going to give a percentage to minority and women-owned businesses as we had promised, and they're not replacing them with like, okay, we're going to actually give them to small businesses. They're just canceling them outright. Others are saying, we're going to put it to small businesses, but here we're seeing in some cases where, the whole participation program is completely canceled and there are no more set aside for smaller businesses, which we're not seeing on the public side. On the public side, so far, what we're seeing is you cancel gender race specific, you replace it with gender race neutral, so the participation requirements are largely still there. Not to say that that's going to be the case forever, but that's what we're seeing right now. And here's, where we talk about staying informed, and because things are changing a lot and all the time, we have to keep up, and you can't just wait for, a webinar to come up for you to know what's going on. Feel free to reach out to us at any point. We're staying on top of this, and, with our partners at LSN and Greenberg Traurig, and there's other resources that the folks here can tell you about.
Yeah, I'll just mention, it's very busy, as you know, here in DC. I start my day with Punch Bowl AM. It's a great resource. The morning newsletter is free, so you can sign up for that. The paid service, you get a few more updates throughout the day. Politico is another great resource that you can track in the morning. They've got very good coverage of what's going on here in DC. They're focused on Capitol Hill and the executive branch, so that's really all they cover.
And on my end, GT maintains a EO and Presidential Action Hub tracker. It changes pretty much every day as there's a lot going on. And one of my good sort of government contract community friends, G2X, has a DOGE contract terminator tracker that's been very helpful for the community. Again, it's always ongoing, and it's certainly worth a visit to track where the scrutiny with the DOGE is coming from. No, I'm sorry, I hope I was on mute with the other one. One of my colleagues requested a fist bump for some unknown reason, so sorry for that. He's retired Undersecretary of the Army, so you do say yes.
Great. Okay, and now to talk about where this is headed. So far we've just been talking facts and what's happened so far. This is a bit more subjective, I would say, on like where are we going, because no one can be sure. But this is based on everyone that we've spoken to so far, and all the articles we've read and things that are going on. We think, after discussing with a lot of people, is that the core requirements are going to remain. And when we talk about requirements, we're talking about percent participation of certain certified businesses, whether they're small businesses, minority-owned, women-owned, local, disadvantaged, SETI, 8A, veteran-owned, That's anyone's guess, but our projection is that the requirements and set-asides are gonna still be there. And compliance documentation is still being required at this point, and we assume as well and project that compliance requirements are still gonna be required in the future to show that you've actually solicited bids from small businesses, veteran-owned businesses, and the like. So that's where we see the market heading, and that's why we think that people still need to be aware of these requirements. You can't just sit here and assume that, okay, I don't need to comply with any of these because of the executive orders. That's not really the case. Your RFP is still what's governing you unless there's a lawsuit that you file and try to change the requirements of the RFP. On that point, anything you'd like to add, Tom, Jose, Shamar?
I don't have too much more to add. I think you covered it very well. Stay tuned. This is a moving target. We're going to have more announcements in the coming weeks. I don't think there's necessarily a structured plan anyone's following, but these are happening pretty rapid fire. So as Jose mentioned at the beginning, it's important to just stay in tune to current events. And if you're involved with federal contracting, keep an eye close on what's happening in DC.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've been doing this long enough where I remember the PPP days where people were trying to, be very flexible and get their pandemic era loans, and we were advising clients on compliance, and it was like, hey, this just so you know, there's going to be some repercussions to the extent that you're, not following everything to a T. And then now there's task force for all those loans that came out. So just keep a long view. Make sure that you're examining your contracts, your compliance to the extent you have any federal contracts, you're seeing amendments, look at those. It's certainly details your friend in these days. But yeah, I think this has been a great conversation. So thank you as always.
That being said, we'll turn to our last slide here, which is questions, Q&A. So if you have any question, feel free to, share your video or not, up to you, but unmute and go ahead unless there's questions in the chat that we want to address already, Stephanie.
I had a couple that were emailed in, but for everybody on the call, if you would like to use the raise hand icon on your Zoom, you can do that and I will call on you. Unfortunately, some of you are still Scott, so I might not know exactly who is who, or feel free to put questions into the chat box as well. And okay, so we have one comment that everybody can kind of chime in on. Might it be advisable to establish mentor proteges before policy changes? What are your guys' thoughts there?
My gut says yes, but you never know what changes the administration is going to make retroactively.
Yeah, I agree. I think to the extent you're considering entering the 8A program, entering mentor proteges, it's better to do it while the program is still exists. Yeah, you never know what the future may hold, but it certainly provide that opportunity to qualify for some of those set-asides.
Yeah,
one of the things that we. Oh, go ahead, Jose.
No, I would say the same thing. Just with the caveat is, as you go through that process, understand what possible changes can be implemented, and take those precautions as you plan through that.
And one thing we noted in the last slide is that relationships are really important right now. So between subs and subcontractors, having those relationships with your prime and making sure that they know who you are, regardless of if you are certified and them needing to use you for whatever that reason is relationships are going to be increasingly important moving forward. Okay, great. We have another question. As the certification requirements change, how do I keep track of them?
I would say check your RFP. So whenever, or request for qualification, request for a bid, invitation to bid, ITB, whatever your state caused it, and check what requirements are there. The agency websites are also being updated as things change. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Reach out to info@toughleaf.com. We keep a tracker on all certifications. You can also go to toughleaf.com and check that out. But if you have any questions on, what am I required to do? What does compliance look like? What changes are in my city or state or my local contracts, feel free to reach out to us, and we will, if we don't know, talk to our resources and try to find that information. We're also connected to multiple procurement agents all over the country, and they will be able to help.
Okay, great. We have another one. How should companies prepare their teams for any of these changes?
Well, I think the first step is make sure you're aware. Set up a system to be tracking what's happening. Shamari's website's got a great tracker for a lot of this. There's other executive order trackers out there as well. Like I said in the beginning, Capitol Hill's not getting a heads up before a lot of these announcements come from the White House. When they hit the media, that's when everyone's finding out outside of the Trump administration's inner circle. So it's important to be following the news. There's a number of good contracting organizations that have websites, whether it's government executive or things like that, that track these things very closely.
And also traditionally, there's the executive orders do blindside everyone, but there's traditionally a proposed rule, rulemaking, a comment period, then a final rule, and then it doesn't really kind of sneak up on you. So I guess one side of the coin would be, to the extent we get back to some new normalcy and we'll get to that process where it's not as rushed, then we could all kind of learn in real time. But yeah, I think Stefan will be happy to share the EO tracker. And again, the other thing is, like, a lot of these will be challenged. The one for the current EOs that Tom mentioned earlier are all enjoined now by a federal court. And so, it'll be a bit of a whiplash for the foreseeable future. There are some other good sort of, resources, alerts, et cetera, that come out too, that alert people to what's, whatever change is going on and currently enforceable.
Great. And then, yes, also, just so everybody knows, on Monday when I share the recording, I will also send links to all of the resources that the presenters gave us. And so you guys will have links to all of that in the post email. Okay, we have a couple more that I want to get through. I'm a general contractor and I've only been dealing with minority women-owned business requirements. I now have an RFP that requires small business certified. How do we do that?
That's a great question. When there's small business certifications, you might have to go. If it's a federal job, you might have to go to the SBA website. If it's local, you might need to go and find new directories that have certified small businesses. And we'd love to help you with that. That's all we focus on here in Tough Leaf. So we have the data on every certified business throughout the country, whether they're certified by the federal government, state, local, or even private. And we have all different types of certifications. So there are minority-owned, women-owned, small, local, veteran, disadvantaged, hub zone. There's, we track over 250 different certifying agencies. Each of them have 5 to 6 certifications. So we're talking about more than 1,000 certifications all in all. We have all of them, so you can contact us, and we're happy to demonstrate how our system is gonna help you find these businesses and get them onto your projects and meet those requirements. Or you don't have to. You can also go to the certification database. It's just gonna be much more challenging.
Great. And I think to wrap up the questions, I have one actually myself. So from what you guys talked about today, what we're seeing is Tough Leaf and what we're seeing in the news. Yes, there are changes coming through. There are a lot of these right now are sitting on the federal level and impacting individual hires versus coming in and impacting massively on the compliance for construction side of things. So would you say it's fair at this point, it's to not really do anything different except stay informed, stay on top of what you can? Compliance is still the legal requirement that construction firms are supposed to follow. And that has not changed as of this point. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, Stephanie, I think that is fair to say. Changes are happening very rapidly, so be prepared. But I think keep an eye on that RFP, follow that to the letter. And if you have questions, you can reach out to someone on this panel or within Tough Leaf, and we can help you. But it's tough to answer that question because there are so many
I know.
uncertainties.
Listen, in 24 hours, what I just said might no longer be valid, but for the moment, it is. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're going to continue to have these conversations throughout the future. As things change, we want to make sure that we're keeping everyone informed, that we are allowing you guys to have access to people in DC that you normally wouldn't have access to. Again, I will be sending out the recording on Monday. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@toughleaf.com. We're also very active on LinkedIn. You can always find me or one of our team members on that site. And thank you so much. And we hope this was beneficial.